Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. Last night, I had an epic adventure. Out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, nobody else around, just a headlamp and good times. Many miles were eaten, and the best part, there was nothing out there that was going to eat me. That's one of the best parts of living in Las Vegas, to be honest with you. We have mountain lions out here for sure, but it's very rare that you run into one, especially when you're hiking at a place like Red Rock. In all the years that I've been at Red Rock, all the hours I've spent at Red Rock, I've ran into exactly one mountain lion, and folks, that shit was plenty. I came up over this ridge. I was doing a climb, a scramble to get up this mountain, and I come up over this ridge, and about 30 feet away from me, there's this mountain lion just like looking at me like, dude, what are you doing climbing up this mountain and showing up on this perch? Thankfully, the thing wasn't hungry and it bolted the other way up over the rocks and over the summit of the mountain. But it was enough to make me almost fall. That was some scary shit, I'll tell you what. Popping up and having a mountain lion's face looking at you is never a fun experience. But besides that, all my years in the backcountry, all my time at places like Red Rock, I've only encountered animals that could eat me a few times. A few bear experiences, but I really don't worry about bears, to be honest with you. Black bears for the most part. Grizzly bears, on the other hand, a whole different sort of animal. But last night was definitely a success. I had a lot of fun. And you can expect a lot of earlier daily drops moving forward now that the weather's getting cooler, because I'm going to be bringing my ass to the mountains more often. So, on to today's article. We have an article from the New York Post today about Hayley Robson. And Hayley Robson was one of the more tragic figures in this whole entire escapade in Palm Beach, in my opinion. She was just a little girl herself, 16, brought in, and when she wouldn't get down with Jeffrey Epstein the way he wanted to get down, meaning she wasn't down to be sexually assaulted by him or active with him, and she didn't fit the criteria, I'm guessing, for their, grooming process, she went through it and it didn't stick, per se, with her. But she did bring other girls over to Jeffrey Epstein so he could molest them. And that must be a lot for her to live with, right? And we're not talking about a girl who was 25 here, 26 here, 30. We're not talking about Sarah Kellen Vickers or Adriana Ross. We're talking about a girl who was 16, came from a disadvantaged home, was offered some money to bring girls over to Jeffrey Epstein's house so they could, quote unquote, give him massages. And of course, that must weigh on her heavily now that she's older and she reflects on it and she understands the true damage that it caused. But I can't even imagine what her mental battle must be like on a daily basis. So let's jump into this article from the New York Post and let's see what they have to say. Epstein survivor says she's happier Ghislaine Maxwell is behind bars. The author of this article, Gabrielle Fonrogue. That's a cool-ass name, Fonrogue. Sounds like an X-Man or something. So Epstein, happier Ghislaine Maxwell is behind bars. I believe that's a sentiment that all of us besides Alan Dershowitz can share. And I don't see how anyone could not be happy with this bipedal serpent rotting away, sustaining herself on bologna sandwiches and oranges. A Jeffrey Epstein survivor said she's happier to see alleged madam, co-conspirator, fellow child abuser, general all-around scumbag, and bipedal serpent, Ghislaine Maxwell, behind bars than she was when she learned that convicted pedophile who molested her was dead, according to a new clip released by the Dr. Oz show. I would think that if I was a survivor, and of course, remember, I only speak for myself. I don't speak for anybody else, right? If I was a survivor, I would be happier to see Ghislaine Maxwell in jail than Epstein dead too. I wouldn't want Epstein dead if I was a survivor, not until after the trial, not until after I could air this son of a bitch out for what he did to me, not before I could get the courts to convict this dude. Yeah, then he could die for all I care. But with Ghislaine Maxwell being behind bars, it's a whole different thing, right? At the very least, we're on the path to justice. Now, there's a lot of potholes on the way, right? The road is full of potholes, and there's no crews coming out to fix it. So we're going to have to navigate this treacherous terrain as we continue to follow this case. And with Ghislaine Maxwell being behind bars, at the very least, this woman is going to face justice. Hayley Robson, 34, is set to appear on an episode of the talk show Thursday where she'll discuss Maxwell and Epstein's recruiting system and how she feels about Maxwell's arrest. So she was on the Dr. Oz show. I didn't watch the clip. I'm going to go check it out later on today if I have some time. But she was on there and she was talking about all of the recruiting system, how it was put into play, how she was paid, how she was sent to get other girls from her school, etc., etc. We've discussed all of that here before. We've went over Hayley Robson's story before. And unlike Nadia Marchinkova, Hayley Robson has come forward, and Hayley Robson's ready to talk, and Hayley Robson's not hiding in the shadows. So from where I'm sitting, Hayley Robson is somebody who actually cares about these other survivors, somebody who actually cares what happens going forward in this case. And I think that works definitely in her favor, right? I do feel that I'm happier that she's arrested, more so than Jeffrey being dead. More so because it's very unusual to see a woman that, if indeed all the accusations are correct, which I believe they are, Robson told Oz in a preview of the upcoming episode. We went over an article that said that, I think it was 38% of people involved in trafficking operations are women. So it's not as rare as you would think. And myself included, I would never ever think that women would be involved in something like this, right? But at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We're all capable of great, great good. But we are all also capable of great evil. Put a sword in a man's hand and he becomes an animal. Good man or bad man. And it's the same situation, right? It's the same deal. I've heard a lot of other survivors' testimonies, which are very sad. It breaks my heart. I'm a victim, and this woman, to have her help a male pedophile rape and molest and groom little girls, it's just unusual to see a woman portray this position, especially when it comes to kids. Again, I would have thought the same thing. But as I've dove deeper, I've taken a deeper dive into this water, into this hole, what you find is there are a lot of women involved in these trafficking rings. And of course, their circumstances vary. Some of them were trafficked themselves, and there's no one shoe size fits all when it comes to situations like this. Everything is nuanced. Everything must be looked at from many angles. There's not just one strategy here or one pathway. There are so many different angles going on here, and there are so many different aspects that need to be looked at. Like I said, things I would have never thought about. And you have these women who are in leadership roles in trafficking rings around the world, and it's crazy to even think about how that could even occur. But again, it goes back to what I just said a second ago. We are all gray characters. Right? Everybody's capable of great evil and great good. It just depends on the circumstances and how far you're pushed. When Robson was 16 years old and growing up in South Florida, she was recruited by a friend to give massages to Epstein wearing nothing but a thong. She rejected his sexual advances, but then, allegedly, started acting as a recruiter where she was paid to find new girls for him, according to a deposition from a 2009 civil suit. So remember, she was 16 years old, right? She was manipulated and brought into this and enticed by the money. I don't think I can explain it to people who have never went to bed hungry, who have never been broke, or who never grew up poor, what it's like. This shit is not easy. Thankfully, I always went to bed with a full belly. I always had clothes on my back. I always had a place to live. And even though we didn't have much money when I was young, I never felt like we were, poor really, but we were. I lived in the inner city my whole life, from New York in the Bronx, okay, and Yonkers. Then we moved to Las Vegas, and I moved right smack dab into the middle of Las Vegas, 2 miles away from the Strip. Not the greatest part of the world, folks. And I have a lot of friends that are still friends to this day that I grew up with, that grew up in circumstances that rival a lot of these girls. And I saw with my own eyes the toll it took on them. People just want to have a happy childhood, and unfortunately, that is not the case for a lot of people. And it's about money, man. It's all about money. Because with money comes opportunity. And when you're poor, your parents aren't home. Both got to work. So you're left to your own devices. Maybe you have a big brother. And maybe that big brother is a good guy who is on the straight and narrow. But more times than not, you have some sort of influence in your life. And at that point, school becomes less attractive. And hanging out on the corner with the corner boys, securing the bag, is where it's at. And while you don't see that with these girls, obviously, you do see them motivated by money to do things that they would never even think of doing ever. And it's all about their economics, man. It's all about their circumstances, their financial circumstances. And that's how these girls were chosen. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, they went after these disadvantaged girls, the most vulnerable amongst us, and they brought them into these disgusting situations where they were not only molested themselves, they had to go find other friends and bring other friends in to be molested as well. And it went on and on and on. Why? Because they were poor. It don't matter if you're poor, man. If you're poor, they don't care about you. If you're white, if you're black, if you're purple, if you're from effing Mars, it does not matter. If you're poor, you are just a pawn on the chessboard, homie. And when all of the poor people and middle class people understand that, and everybody starts to understand that it's a shell game, well, then we're really going to be ready for some change. Robson herself was investigated for her role in recruiting victims for Epstein when he was originally arrested back in 2007, but a grand jury declined to indict her, and they should not have indicted her. She was a little girl, 16 years old. I mean, come on. So what, we're going to indict her, and she's going to go to jail with Tova Noel and the other guard, and Jeffrey Epstein's friends are all going to walk free? That's justice? Nah, that's not justice. That's slapping the hammer down on poor people once again. That's what that is. In Thursday's episode, Robson will explain how the recruiting worked. You were 16 years old. You're put in the situation that even as a mature woman, it's hard to navigate. You go home and you've been offered $200 to recruit young women and girls, actually, the way you were recruited by your friend. Did you decide to bring girls? Offer them the opportunity of going to Epstein's house? How many? How did that work? Oz asks. Robson in a preview of the episode. And that was basically how it did work, right? These girls were recruited, they were brought in, they were abused, and they were sent back out to bring in other girls to keep the scheme running. It's a pyramid scheme. A sexual pyramid scheme was a great way to describe what was going on in Palm Beach. At that point, I had a couple of girlfriends that ended up saying, "Hey, listen, I want to go to Jeffrey's. I'll work. Can you bring me?" "I did," Robson answered. "Actually, my lawyer and I sat down and went over all the females that I had brought. Originally, I thought I had brought in more. But when we got down to it and really dissected how many girls I had brought in 8 girls. Of course, at that point, the girls that I had brought to Jeffrey Epstein's house brought other girls underneath them to Jeffrey's house as well. See what I mean about the pyramid scheme? And they were very shrewd with how they did it, right? You notice they didn't go after any rich girls. They didn't go after any girls on the island. None of their neighbor girls were molested. Only poor girls from off the island. Only girls with no money. Only girls with no means to defend themselves in any way, be it in person or with a quality legal team to chase down their accusations. It's sickening to me. I am so sick of it. The way that people like this manipulate situations from the time the abuse starts all the way through their trial. These people like Jeffrey Epstein try and manipulate every last situation. And for decades, they've gotten away with it. But thankfully, that shit is coming to an end. Maxwell, 58, is being held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn on charges of conspiring with Epstein to sexually abuse women and perjury. Epstein, 66, was found dead in his Manhattan lockup in August 2019 while facing a slew of sex trafficking charges. Look, this whole situation with Hayley Robson is so sad. And furthermore, what about all those other girls? Those other girls we haven't heard from. What about the girls that she brought, and then the girls that they brought, and then the girls that they brought? See what I'm saying here? When does it end? How do we know how many victims there truly were? And that's something I've had a hard time wrapping my mind around in this case. How many victims, what is the true tally? What is the true tally of Jeffrey Epstein's decades-long crime spree of sexual abuse and assault? I mean, according to survivors and other sources, we know he was bringing in girls from Eastern Europe and Asia and all over the place. By the boatload, basically. What happened to all of these girls? And that's the question that haunts me on a daily basis as we go through this case. And as I dig and I do more research and I start putting pieces together, I'm still where I was at when we first started, basically, in that aspect of this case. There are so many unnamed victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And there are I can only imagine the untold stories of horror and despair at his and Ghislaine Maxwell's hands. So when we hear from the survivors who have come forward, and when we hear from people like Virginia and Maria and Annie and Sarah and Teresa, etc., you start to understand just how truly sinister this shit was. And then you add it all up with what went on in Palm Beach with this large grooming process and abuse of high school-aged girls. I don't know how anyone in their right mind cannot want Ghislaine Maxwell to spend the rest of her life underneath the prison. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody, all of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. As for me, I'm thinking another early daily drop today might be in the cards. We'll see how the day progresses. All right, everybody, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and one way or the other, my fat yap will be moving later on.